Before we start today's episode, I gotta tell you about this amazing vinyl furniture I just got from SidetrackedWorkshop.com. I now have the double sidekick model in my front room, and it's absolutely killer. It holds a couple hundred records, and it looks beautiful. Check it out on my Instagram. It's very handsome indeed. And when you get a moment, check out SidetrackedWorkshop.com and show off your vinyl in style. That's SidetrackedWorkshop.com.
Welcome to The Vinyl Guide, the podcast for record collectors and music nerds. Here's your host, the biggest record nerd of them all, Nate Goyer.
Well, hey everyone, it's Nate. Welcome to episode 487 of The Vinyl Guide, the podcast for record collectors and music nerds. And wow, I'm exhausted. I'm back here in Sydney. It's been a whirlwind trip to the States. I was traveling the last few weeks throughout California, did some podcast stuff up in San Francisco and San Jose, and then just barreled down Highway 5 to Southern California, where I had a fantastic time hanging out with the crew at Dr. Strange Records, and then, of course, hit up the Orange County Record Show. Everything was packed. The whole schedule was just packed, back to back to back. Wanted to get it all in without being away for too long. Huge thanks to everyone who came out to hang and said hi. And then after the OC Record Show, I headed up north to see my mom, who's in the hospital. And again, huge thanks to everyone who sent a nice note. I really appreciate the good juju you guys are putting out in the universe for me and my family. That is hugely appreciated. So I'm quite stoked today. We've got a great one for you here on the show. Mr. Martin Rev. Whose work you may know from the band Suicide with Alan Vega, and he's got a very rich solo catalog as well. Martin began his musical career with the partnership in Alan Vega. Suicide came out of New York City in the early 70s in the Max's Kansas City community, and they are truly the definition of music pioneers. I mean, that first Suicide album still sounds like nothing else, either before or after. And it has really pushed some boundaries and music more than just about any band or album I can name. I mean, it is so concentrated. The innovation is so concentrated in that first Suicide album. No wonder it's an absolute collectible these days. So today, Martin and I talk all about that early period, the development of Suicide, the anger the audiences shown towards them. It was not easy being Martin Rev on stage in the early 70s. The very clever tactic that Martin and Alan showed by putting an acetate of their music in the Max's Kansas City jukebox to get discovered. And it worked. He tells a story all about that and even talks about where that acetate is today. Of course, we talk about the first Suicide album, the early tours, the subsequent Suicide and Martin Rev solo records, and lots more. It was an absolute honor to talk to Martin. He's a true genius. And again, it's so great to have him here on the Vinyl Guide podcast. Check out his works, grab some vinyl, and even see him live. Head over to martinrev.com for all the details and the links. And just before I get to the interview, I want to give a quick plug for the Vinyl Guide's Patreon page, patreon.com/Vinyl Guide. That's where you can go to help support this show, even for a few measly bucks per month. It's a huge help. And of course, you get access then to extra stuff, including high-resolution audio, commercial-free episodes, and this week you get an extended interview with Martin Rev. So I try to put extra stuff up there because I really appreciate when people help support this podcast. Patreon.com/Vinyl Guide. Head up there now, and we truly appreciate your support. Alrighty, let's get into our conversation with Martin Rev of Suicide and beyond.
How you doing? Can you hear me?
I could hear you fine, Martin. How are you?
Okay, that's good. I'm fine.
Very good. Well, Martin, thank you so much for joining us here. It's an absolute honor to have you on the show. A lot of what we talk about here are records, vinyl collecting, rarities, and I would imagine, I get the impression anyway, that you have an appreciation for vinyl records because up to this day, a lot of your solo material still comes out on vinyl. Is that fair? Are you still a bit of a vinyl aficionado?
No, I'm not an aficionado, that's for sure. Of course, we all kind of grew up with vinyl before CDs, and the label you're referring to, Bureau B, it's kind of cool because everything they put out is CD and vinyl, besides digital. So everything comes out with a component of vinyl, and I like seeing them for sure. I like the large image of covers, especially when they're kind of cool. Uh, as far as really being an expert or in the sense of following vinyl totally to the point of searching them down and playing them a lot. If I was more of a DJ, I might have done that.
Okay.
I like the fact that CDs offer a lot more space, but at the same time, CDs are basically uh, going the way of where vinyl went too. And vinyl came back in this sense, but that we're talking about. I don't know if CDs will, but apparently everything is just being more and more just being streamed. And what I was told sometimes by people in the labels, yeah, it's just the CD and everything else is just like a calling card to tell you it's there. And the real sales are going to be now when people go look for it online.
Right. So, do you have a record player set up, or are you pretty
I
much
have a
all
record
digital?
player, but I rarely use it. But I wouldn't mind using it more. But
Mm-hmm.
there is a turntable
It's a hassle. I get it.
behind me. Records take up a lot of space, man.
They do. They do.
And I still have a lot of them.
Oh, you do? Okay. Do you keep them all from back in the day?
Most of them were, yeah. Yeah, I don't buy any really anymore, although I did occasionally. Maybe the last time was several years ago, 5 years ago. So a couple I wanted to get.
I'm curious as to some of the records that you and likely Alan were listening to in the early days that influenced you, made you think the way you thought when you made those early Suicide recordings.
Well, I can't see or say anything made me think the way I did then from coming from vinyl or any particular group that was contemporaneous with us. Alan, maybe more so, because Alan was listening to Iggy and the German electronic groups at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it wasn't. At that time, I was hardly playing records, although I remember what really switched me over to electronics and the desire to go into that world that I found was fresh and refreshing was hearing Tony Williams' Lifetime when it came out, the first one. And I wasn't buying a lot of records at all at that time. I was just getting by, actually, as best as I could. But having some curiosity definitely about that direction Tony Williams was taking then, after everything he did before, as an great acoustic drummer with Miles Davis. So I put that on and I listened, and I just heard something in there. There was something there was a note or two that John McLaughlin hit on guitar that blended somewhere or didn't blend, but against the organ, Larry Young. And I just heard it in a 3D kind of dimensional way, or 4D. Like, wow, that's a whole territory right there, man. That's potential. So from there, I said to myself, I'm going to try to get something electric that could plug in a keyboard that's electric. And I went and did it. I paid it off on time, and it was a very bare thing. It wasn't a synthesizer. It was one of the first electric pianos they made, which were basically terrible in retrospect. But turns out everybody was using them on the early fusion stuff with Miles, Davis, Rhodes. pianos, and this is a Wurlitzer. I mean,
I guess I'm not too surprised that you were influenced by a drummer. I mean, very rhythmic what you do, and so it's just interesting to me how you came from a jazz background. Alan seems to, from what you say, absorb
well,
some of the krautrock. He was aware of some of that. Were you aware of any other electronic?
I came from a rock background. I grew up with rock, doo-wop, rhythm and blues background, really. Mm-hmm. Then I went into jazz pretty deeply. Mm-hmm. But did you say it was surprising that it was a drummer that it was, or not surprising?
Not surprising. Not surprising.
Well, that's interesting. I started playing with Suicide before I brought the keyboard in. I was playing drums. I had a couple of spare pieces that were given to us, my family at the time. When I say us, my kids, which I already had. And I brought those down. Actually, when I first heard Alan trying to get sound out of a little tape recorder with feedback, try to develop that, I just picked up a couple of spare pieces of metal industrial springs and things and started drumming on the floor to try to direct it in a way that worked for me percussive wise, because I was just sitting around too. Didn't have any instruments with me, and I hadn't met them yet. I hadn't met he and Paul please. But now your question was at the end of all that he was into, more contemporary stuff. Because after he saw Iggy in New York, that turned him totally around he said to himself, he would say that he said to himself, he could not no longer be an artist. He was quite an accomplished visual artist already, unless he went into performing. But Alan had been aware, listened to a lot of music growing up. He told me how he used to, certain pieces he loved, Bartok, Symphony for Orchestra, Stravinsky's Symphony of Psalms, things like that. He liked Coltrane's Meditations a lot. And I think he was more versed in rock groups, like you say, more contemporary ones around the 70s or what.
The term punk music has evolved so much over the years, and I think pretty much everyone has their own definition of what that could be. Early on, I understand Suicide was using the phrase punk music for gig posters and things like that. Well, what did that term mean to you and Alan in the early days, punk music?
Didn't mean anything, man, except to the fact that we were looking for something to call our next gig and put on the flyer we were printing up. And that just sounded, and Lester Bangs had just used it, and Cream magazine to describe Iggy. It's a good phrase, a fresh phrase, punk music. So we just said, yeah, let's call this punk music. It wasn't a scene at the time. There weren't other groups calling themselves punk bands or anything. This is before the journalist came down a few years later and gave it a name, before punk magazine was started. It just sounded right. And, of course, the word punk was always used when I was a teenager anyway, referring to guys on the street like us, kind of, that, very loosely in gangs, not really in gangs as we know them, that were, had names and whatnot, and more organizational formats. But guys, and there were people who, were much more into fighting and getting into brawls on the street. And then there are the ones who were right in there, but did not actually fight and actually would try to get out of the way of the fighting. And you might say they live to fight another day or not fight, because those are the punks. Punks are more like the ones who are, final analysis, they weren't going to be really throwing the punches. Mm-hmm. Those are the heavy hitters. who usually started everything anyway. Sometimes the punks did too. Punks were more vocal, using their mouth to instigate and to start something up.
Okay.
And then punk, as I saw later, it was used in the 40s and 50s. You see it in film noir and stuff like that, what they call it punk. It's also like a cheap gangster kind of. It's not a term of endearment if they call each other punks. And then I understand in prison too, punks are another name for gays, which most people are in prison at some point, probably anyway. But in prison, prisoners who are gay, having relations with other prisoners.
So you read the term from Lester Bangs, who coined it, I believe, and then you guys just said, "Yep, let's put it on there." It seems like a punk has always been kind of someone on the outskirts of society, or what was accepted society at the time.
It has an energy, man. It just has an energy, like suicide. We do it. Hey, suicide. What do you think? Alan asked me. I asked him. As soon as I heard it, I said, "There it is."
Yep.
I didn't think about what it meant until later. I could always think about, hey, suicide could mean this. It could mean this. It could mean this. It could mean this. But at the moment, it's right or wrong, like any other name.
Has it ever been difficult being in a band called Suicide?
Always difficult, even up to now. But the band, it's not a problem for me. I'm not in suicide. I don't perform with suicide as suicide. But suicide held the band back from probably a lot of stuff, but it also focused a lot of attention on the band.
Yeah.
It was just the right name at the right time. It was a rock and roll sounding energy. It was an energy.
From what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong here, one of the ways that the band got the attention of Marty Thau was recording Rocket USA and putting it on an acetate that wound up in the Max's Kansas City jukebox.
Right.
Is that right? Okay.
Exactly.
That
was the purpose of recording it.
That's a genius move. Was there only one copy, or did you make a few of those?
There were two copies. One busted at some one point, and there is another one now, which it turns out I didn't even remember. I gave it to a good friend who was functioning as our local road manager at the time. I haven't seen him in many years. It turns out he had the other copy because the one that split, I didn't notice that till years later. And we just, recently Henry Rollins bought it from him. Mark was the road guy's name, and Marky, and that was it. Those two copies.
Okay.
So the one that was on the, I had two copies. In other words, the one that was on the jukebox was probably a third copy, but nobody's been able to find that since.
I'm glad at least one of those are safe. I'm sure Henry will take good care of it. So you have one that's split.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have one that cracked somewhere in transit or whatever. I also think I have a copy on tape because we did an interview at a radio station, FMU, in New Jersey, one time at that time. And they played the single and they gave me the tape, the reel to reel. I haven't tried to copy it yet or listen to it since then, but it was Keep Your Dreams on the Other Side in Rocket USA.
Now, that version of Rocket USA, was that the same version that wound up on the Max's Kansas City compilation?
They were all the same version, but they were recorded. No, it was recorded different times, differently. So it wasn't the same version in that sense.
Okay. All right. So it's a very unique version. That what's on that acetate is basically not available anywhere else.
No, it's not. Have you been able to hear it?
I have not.
Okay. Probably. I was wondering if you had, because it'd be cool if you could hear it.
I'd love to hear it. In fact, one of the big questions I had was about the various versions. So that's good that we have that clarity.
Well, Max's apparently put out another album after the first Max's record that has another rocket on there too. I think it was a live version, long version.
Hmm.
Yeah, Max's second Kansas City record.
Now, when you guys went into the studio to record that first album, how closely was what landed on the record to what you guys envisioned? Was that the true Suicide sound, or were there compromises made in the studio? What are your
That's what it
recollections of that?
was. It was really a live record. We cut it live. It was everything we had been doing for the 6 years or so before that. Uh,
Hmm.
and when I say 6 years, of course, that was developing into always one year after another. And when we got to the studio, it was just like another gig. The only difference was that the in production, Craig Leon was the chief producer then. You know, in setting it up, he set up he asked me to just to record in like certain effects I was using and whatnot separately. Like first do the main track, and then if there's anything else, and usually I would do that all at one time on a in a club, um, whatever else there was, and we did it live. Alan, it's everything we were doing. We didn't basically write anything new for that record as far as tracks are concerned.
And you guys had been together for many years. I think you said 6 years before
Six,
recording that.
yeah.
I I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys had a lot of material that didn't make the album. Is that
Uh,
fair?
yeah, a few things, definitely. There are things on those what you'd call the first rehearsal tapes that came out after of the second album. There are tracks there that we had been doing before the first album that I don't think we were doing them anymore. We weren't doing those live anymore. So in that sense, yeah, one might say that there was more stuff. But I think these were the ones that are the most up to date in our minds because that's what we were doing live at that time.
Right. So those were the songs you felt best represented the band at the time.
Well,
This,
they represented the band because that was the band. you
yeah.
know, I mean, that was what we did. Cherie, Ghost Rider, Rocket USA was the first one that I came to when I was looking for another way of approaching rock and roll. That meant something to me.
Hmm.
A hit on Rocket USA. It took me 5 minutes, thankfully. And from there, what I saw, what I heard, opened up a whole territory for me. And then I started writing Ghost Rider and Cherie and everything from there. So you have, and then bringing in the rhythm machine at some point after that, maybe several months or not that long, started doing a lot of these other things, which a lot of those you'll hear on the Space Blue and all those kinds of things you'll hear, yeah, right on those first rehearsal tapes, you might say. I mean, they weren't the absolutely first ones either. First ones didn't have were just total electronic screams and total wall of sound kind of thing, if you want to describe it some way or another. But there aren't any tapes around of that anymore. Early Suicide, first year.
What were the instruments that were used on that first album? What synthesizers did you have at the time?
First album, I had a Farfisa organ and a rhythm machine that I had been using live. That's what I've been using live. Both of them, Farfisa, I was fortunate to pay a little bit for, maybe from a friend of ours named Elodie Loughton, who ended up becoming a composer in her own right years later. Rhythm machine, I was lucky again to find in the bylines, the used stuff, newspapers, for all I could afford at the time, which was $30, which was a lot for me. And I went out and heard it. And when I heard it, I put it on. I said, "That's it. I'll take it." And that's what we used all the way up to all through the first album.
Do you remember the model of the rhythm machine?
Not offhand, but it's a Seagram's. This is the guy apparently who made the pinball bowling alley pin setters. A company called Seagram's that does that when the pins come down on the setter.
Yeah.
Yeah, same company.
Oh. I'll do a bit of research. I'm a bit of a synth nerd. So that whole first album was just the rhythm machine, a Farfisa organ, and a bunch of effects. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, not many effects either. I mean, like I played I played a line on Sharita. I usually do it at the same time, but I did it separately. A high little like xylophone line, and I did. I was playing a radio, which I used to do live, little portable radio on Frankie Teardrop, things like that. Otherwise, the effects were, remembering it now, is when I used to plug in from the beginning. The sound came to me, and Alan knew about this before and told me about it too. You can plug in these little fuzz boxes and things on your organ, like these little electro harmonics. So I said, yeah, let me try that. And right away, that was the sound. It turned like a Wurlitzer sound. Everybody knows that. Anybody who knows that knows a very thin little electric piano. It was the first one in that genre, basically. And now you had like this really thick, like an organ sound, distorted too, like a heavy guitar, distort fuzz.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what the producers meant, Craig meant when he said, come in straight. Too. That's what it was. Don't go through your boxes if you can. And we can lay that in after, or, so we'll get that sound, but this way they had a cleaner input, I guess.
Right. Yeah, you don't print the effects on the
Right.
tape. So do you know if those tapes exist? If we were to listen to those tapes today, it would be clean organ without the effects on it.
That's right. They would. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. It's basically it's a 16-track studio, but we didn't use, even 16 tracks, I don't think. I mean, Craig would separate, like if he was putting delays on something, he'd have separate delay tracks, things like that. The way producers tend to work that way. But yeah, coming in, it was just clean like that. But it sounded, I've heard them. It pretty much sounds the same. I mean, same as the record, and the record sounds pretty close to what we were doing anyway.
Okay. So those multi-tracks do exist. And you have heard them. I imagine you guys.
There's one multi-track that exists. The other one was lost somewhere. I don't know where, not by me, but there is another multi-track that exists. And, for whatever it's worth now, it's been baked and copied.
Right.
So, it's been digitized.
Okay. So you have one, another one's been lost to time. Perhaps it's with the acetate from Max's Kansas City's jukebox.
Yeah. Or Henry Rollins.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he does have quite a big basement. He could have all sorts of stuff there.
Well, he wants to put it out as a single.
Yeah.
And I have no problem with that on his level. I just thought, why can't we make, because I know like BMG has been doing commemorative, like things that, package kind of things like for Way of Life, first record, second record, kind of like combining it with other tracks that haven't been heard, singles, things like this to try to, blow off some steam for them and, make it into a bigger kind of thing. So I suggested that to him, that why just throw it out as a single like this on a label that he likes, which is fine. You can make a kind of a package out of it, make it, forget package even, just make a thing out of this that, the single is just like it's just part of it. And that part of it really gives it an attraction because most people haven't heard it.
Yeah.
So But anyway, we never can get to that point.
Well, maybe that will come up because I think that would be. There's been several reissues of very famous acetates. The Elvis acetate that he made for
Yeah.
his mother. There's a few others that the
Oh,
Bob
yeah.
Dylan one or the Velvet Underground one where they made it look just like the label of the original acetate.
Were they 40? They were albums.
Well, the Elvis one was a '78, I believe.
Yeah.
The Velvet Underground was a 12-inch, but there's no reason you couldn't do the same for a 7-inch. Make a special.
And they put them out by themselves.
It was generally something that was like on a record store day.
That's what BMG does, record store day.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Jack White, he bought
Mhm.
the Elvis acetate and then he put it out on a Third Man Records kind of special pressing. Again, it looks just like an acetate, but it's a regular record and true to form as much as they could get it.
And they're pretty much probably pretty major label kind of promotional kind of things that they're doing on it. They did well, not so much.
Well, I think even a label like Henry's could probably, I would imagine, get a lot of attention to do this anyway and get the resources to make it happen right.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah. Well,
If the desire is there.
that'd be well. I think the demand is there. We'll see if
BMG would love to do it, and they're talking now about putting it out with another edition of maybe I don't know what the album would be.
yeah.
Maybe the last album, American Supreme, or something like this, and then some. Like last time, I did a single of pretty much unheard yet tapes that were found by Jared Arto, like online and places, and then they would add this to that, and you get they use another version of Frankie Teardrop for the suicide one, I think.
They called that the first version. I think I'm not sure what. There were multiple. Was that
Right, they called it the first version.
Was there a different take in that, or was it the same?
It was a different text. Alan decided to change the lyrics after we cut that.
Okay.
So we kept the same track. He came in and cut the lyrics as we know them now.
Got it. Okay, so the music's the same in the first version,
That's
but
right.
just the lyrics. Got it. Okay.
Right.
All right. Talk to me a little bit about that album cover. Who created that, and what are your memories of making that and your reaction to that?
No memories except Marty enlisted an artist he knew, graphics artist, that Alan had put together some letters, like from a newspaper. We're figuring out a cover now, in black and white, and he kind of assembled them on a piece of paper. And pretty much those are them. And then he had glued them on a piece of white paper. And Marty brought those into the artist himself, who's credited on the album that he was working with. And the artist brought it in, produced it, so to speak, added the red, the letters, the color, the black, the red, the white, and the whole thing.
Because it looks like the blood looks like it could almost spell something, like, or there's some sort of imagery in that blood. So you're saying that there's not, or you don't know of it.
I don't know what was in his name escapes me right now. It's on the cover. What was in his mind? Who knows? His visual imagination, man. Like anybody else's.
The cover art was credited to a guy named Timothy Jackson.
Timothy Jackson. Very good. Okay.
Early in the history of the band, there was a lot of negative reviews.
Right.
Did that frustrate the band, or did you look at them potentially as a bit of a badge of honor from publications like Rolling Stone and things like that probably weren't aligned, that definitely weren't aligned to the scene you were looking to connect with anyway?
Rolling Stone was, I would say, one of the worst reviews ever was Rolling Stone for the first record. Robert Christgau, he gets the award. or not mention his name, and because he wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
And no, they were around. Most of the early reviews, but there was a lot like the Village Voice and whatnot. We couldn't get much out of New York. It was, the idea was suicide. You can't. We go to Philly, you go to Washington, D.C. You can't go out west. You can't go in America, man.
Mm-hmm.
I'll kill you out there or something. So the reviews in Europe after the first record were really, really great. France was apparently knew about us and was writing about us before we even recorded. That's Liberation
Mm-hmm.
in France. Now, our first really good review in a way, I think it's Roy Hollingsworth from NME,
Mm-hmm.
if I have his name correctly, because there's a Roy Hollingsworth, there's a Roy that's a producer also that produced the Cars records all the time. So he happened to be in New York and heard us at the Mercer Arts Center. We had like maybe a month of gigs once a week. And he wrote this incredible review, What Has Rock Given Birth To? And he described us as like he was blown away by the difference, at least by what he heard and saw. It didn't frustrate us. I mean, just like the audiences didn't frustrate us when they booed like crazy. And, I mean, I didn't get off the stage like, what the hell are we doing? I knew what we were doing. If I was doing it the way I wanted to do it, I got off the stage feeling great. It's like the story of The Rite of Spring when Stravinsky and Nijinsky came off stage after all that controversy, booing and walking out and yelling at them, throwing things. And they started blaming each other. Stravinsky said, it's because the way you choreographed Nijinsky, Basilea. And Nijinsky, no, but it's your music, man. It's the kind of music you wrote, man. Obviously, So they argued with each other. It wasn't like that for us at all. Turns out Diaghilev, who was there, was all smiles because he was very happy about the controversy. Because what he saw from his elevated position at the moment, was like, hey, this is great. This is what you should have, man. This is what's going to give us attention. And we were not Stravinsky and Nijinsky. And we weren't Diaghilev either, because we weren't even thinking about the attention. We're just thinking about, hey, man. Because you get hostility like that, just makes you play harder.
It emboldens you.
It emboldens you. Either that or you get off. You're not going to get off. You're not going to get weaker. You get stronger.
Yeah. It would seem to me that the band really embraced that controversy or those emotions, those booings. If you didn't, you wouldn't have put out something like 23 Minutes in Brussels or made that available. How integral was that to the band? Like once the band started finding acceptance, did it feel like you lost something?
Hey there, audiophiles. If you're seeking stylish furniture to showcase your stereo and record collection, well, look no further than SidetrackedWorkshop.com. Sidetracked Workshop designs extraordinarily elegant record cabinets and consoles that add sophistication and panache to your music hobby. Handcrafted in the good old USA in the vinyl-loving city of Portland, Oregon, Sidetracked Workshop's designs are a music lover's dream. Made with real walnut veneered wood and brass accents, these gorgeous designs add class and taste to the record room and ship fully assembled and ready to enjoy. Just check out the designs for yourself at SidetrackedWorkshop.com. Look, you spend thousands of dollars on records. Don't keep them in a crate, and don't risk your records on those feeble wooden pegs from IKEA. Your music deserves the dignity of Sidetracked Workshop. That's SidetrackedWorkshop.com. Elegant solutions for the vinyl lifestyle. Oh, and hey, record nerds, don't forget to clean your records with the very best and safest record cleaner, the Groove Washer. Make your records look and sound their very best and store them with confidence using the new Groove Washer Groove Guard record sleeves. You gotta try this out. It makes a huge difference to the quality of your vinyl experience. Ask for the Groove Washer by name at your local record store and accept no substitutes. Or head over to groovewasher.com and use discount code VINYLGUIDE10.
All hail the Groove Washer.
That's groovewasher.com, discount code VINYLGUIDE10.
It would seem to me that the band really embraced that controversy or those emotions, those booings. If you didn't, you wouldn't have put out something like 23 Minutes in Brussels or made that available. How integral was that to the band? Like once the band started finding acceptance, did it feel like you lost something?
No, not to me. Actually, because I never felt we were cultivating. Alan more so because Iggy was his template, you might say, coming from another art, visual art direction. And now Iggy was the thing, the performance technique, aesthetic of Iggy, the living theater, the kind of total theater, in a sense. And the confrontational part. So Alan definitely had that in mind, I think, to continue, but he also had his own frustrations, the life we were living, the way we saw the world, the own frustrations in life, you might say, as ecstatic as the lives we were living because, creating were. So in that sense, he would maybe provoke more. I would provoke. Apparently, I was provoking by the sound itself was provoking and the combination of it. But I wasn't going out to, okay, now I'm going to get this audience. No, and totally Alan wasn't either. But when the audience reacted that way too, sometimes he'd spear on, like if he saw some people acting that he wanted to mess around with and to sit in the front tables or whatever, he would do that to let off his own steam. Now he's got his own matrix, psychological, personal matrix he's working through, creative, that reflects on both those things. Mm-hmm. But then the reaction, when it came from the audience, sometimes in such negative ways, as you say, it emboldens you too, and you start sometimes, doing like more provocative, controversial things. In my case, I might toss something out, like if I was drinking a glass of water, I might toss it out on the first couple of tables. Now you're in a slightly different dynamic of the performing zone. Now the 23 Minutes over Brussels was not our idea at all. That's a perfect example of how that controversy, you might say, grew in and of itself organically from the performance and the audience. If anything, we were on a large stage because now we were working these large, these theaters. We were opening for Elvis Costello. Mm-hmm. So he was doing all theaters, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. He was already doing quite well, the circuit. So Alan, if anything, even for Alan, we were on a large stage, man. We could have been a large symphony orchestra, those places. And there wasn't any contact really with the audience. So he wasn't provoking anyone really, except by doing what he did, which is sing, you might say, verbalize to what I was doing when I did. And if in the first couple of seconds or minutes or whatever, you had that controversy, it came from the audience. Mm-hmm. And that's what the record attests to. Okay. The idea to put it out was from the label we were working with then. Howard Thompson was working with Braun Records from the UK. And he was the one who signed us to Europe, to the UK. And he, he was traveling with us in the beginning too, and the first 3 gigs, and he thought this is a great idea, promotional thing too. It's part of sell the record, the album too. So let's put out you know, a numbered bunch of these copies that could go free too with the album, if, those kind of things, promotional stuff. So, but that's how it happened, especially in those larger places. You couldn't get near the audience to do it. Especially, we went from Costello to The Clash, opening them for a month. They would actually build barricades because they knew the history already. The Clash had so much controversy, even though they were already quite big already, playing bigger places, but they couldn't play established theaters anymore on this tour that we did with them now. The second time around, they too much got destroyed. So they were all in like airport hangars, They made into theaters, military base kind of things, and alternative place. And they'd come in and they'd build barricades between the not right in front of the stage, but enough, like chicken wire going all the way up from the floor over, several feet above the stage from the front. So all we were doing really at that point was doing what we do, which is all we ever would do, which we were intended to do anyway. And whatever controversy was in that was embedded in it, which is an interesting point, thing with how say the sound, the music can have controversy in it. Well, of course, in a certain sense, an aesthetic sense, we seem to be breaking a certain mold, challenging the status quo, it seemed to me, if you look at it in retrospect. So, I mean, there were no, I don't even have to go through that description because you could see it, It was not a band in any kind of traditional sense. There weren't traditional instruments. And we were doing it with with total, total emboldenment as rock and roll, total rock and roll. I mean, it was like, the same attitude, total attitude. I mean, hey, you either want to say this is either the future, or it's funny, or it's okay, or no, this is not if this is the future, I don't want it. So underneath, you're almost feeling it is the future, and it may be the future, and I don't want that. So I'm going to rebel against this right now. Get rid of this now, this electronic, whatever it is. I want to hear my guitars. I want to hear my industrial shit. And I also want to hear the band that's coming on, because they're not the openers. I mean, they are the openers. The openers always tend to get a lot of fluff.
Yeah.
In general.
But you went early on from being resisted, from having that conflict with the audience, to then being accepted. I mean, that must have been some sort of level of satisfaction, but also maybe some puzzlement that, you were able to turn this tide to your point of view.
I was never puzzled from my remember Alan said on the end of the Clash tour, we did about a week of solo shows. And the Clash tour were like going further and further into a war zone, into the foxholes, even it made Elvis's tour look even tame in comparison, although it wasn't. And it was one after the other because it was a UK tour. We went higher and higher up into the, Midlands, Highlands, and it got heavier and heavier as you got up there. I mean, this is the industrial motherland, I guess you would say. So after that, we went further up, but on our own. They booked us some gigs. We went to Edinburgh, Scotland. And Edinburgh had a nice little, like a ballroom kind of a thing, not a total big, large theater, but like not a large club. The circle, they had like a strobe light in the middle. And turns out people were dancing. All of a sudden, people were dancing. And at the end, when we went to the dressing room, people came back, like the Edinburgh philosophers. Apparently, that's where a lot of philosophy has its home originally, with like notebooks, asking us questions, writing down, very studious minded, you might say. So Alan used to say, and sometimes in interviews too, that when he saw them dancing, he says, "That's it, we're finished. It's all over." So from his standpoint of like, and plus you get so used to the controversy, but he also, as a theatrical technique, also employed that. Not necessarily a musical one in his mind. He was working from two ends. I was working theatrically too, but I'm more stationary. So my theatrical view on it was different. It was more, and that's how we played off each other. It's more in the way I dressed, the way I looked, this and that. I didn't feel that because I never felt that we needed controversy in the beginning. And I wasn't really that interested in whether the audience was dancing or throwing things. I don't even, or screaming boo, or the only thing with throwing stuff is that I was interested in getting out of the way and not being hit. you know. But other than that, I wasn't really, that wasn't my, that's the difference between oral and visual too. So I was listening to what, to the scene, but first and foremost to what was coming out of me. Because that's what a musician really is talking about. He's talking about something that's sound, goes through the ears. So who cares what's happening out there? So when they changed over, if anything, it just made it easier. I would just as soon play a gig because I'm playing the same way. I'm playing, whatever controversy, whatever provocation, whatever anger, whatever angst, psychological stuff was there in me before we did this, and there in Alan before we did this, and that's going to come out in your work too if you've gotten really deeply into it, and that's going to be there. Excuse me. Anyway, I'm only concerned about if I got what I wanted to get, if I reached what I like. Excuse me.
Right.
And personally, musically, I might say. So if I get off the stage and nobody's like at some of the Clash gigs when you had to be taken out of the dressing room on a side door, Elvis, because now the place was rioting, the whole house was rioting, pulling off acoustic tiles off these theater walls, these new theaters, and the bounces, we had people, all kinds of kids in there, in headlocks and everything. And somebody'd come back to the dressing room because we just got off and say, "We got to get you out of here. There's a riot here." So they put us out through the side door and into a car. That's what it was then. And if it's not that, okay, fine. This makes it a little easier. You get off stage and nobody's, and it didn't happen overnight. It's not like we were, all of a sudden it was easy, or all of a sudden it wasn't reactive like that. Plus, we didn't go to Europe after the first tour and a couple of weekend things we did on our own. We didn't go to Europe for about 5 years, maybe like 1980, 85, again, or 6. So we missed a lot of that potential, too, of reaction. And then by the time we came back, I think we were headlining mostly, not necessarily tremendously large places, but. And now there was a lot of talk about us. This is where Marty Thau approached us, and he said, "Listen, a lot of bands now in England, they're talking about you guys. Six Nig Sputnik, all this, and Soft Cell soon after, and all this, you guys, you got to go back to Europe. This is the time to go, man. And they're all talking about you." So he said, "I'll book you a tour if you want." He wasn't directly managing us at that time. We said, "Okay, go ahead." So we went back. So now, 6 years after the fact, and there's this introduction to us from the press in that sense, and other groups, especially. Groups were the hot groups of the day. So, now people want to come and see what they dug, what they like. Why do they like it?
After that first record, you guys I'm assuming, had visions of what the second record would be. Before Ric Ocasek stepped in, did you have any thoughts about what the follow-up would be? How that would sound?
Not direct thoughts. I'm sure I did. I mean, I always have thoughts. They weren't specific enough that I can remember them now, because a lot of that record came from the equipment I was using, and that was because Rick was involved, and he kind of opened that possibility up to us, introduced the possibility of using those things that had just been coming out. So for my end, I basically developed the record from the record itself, from what I was using. Of course, some of the tracks we had already been doing, a lot of some we hadn't been, but they were more familiar.
Yeah.
But the palette, you might say, the materials I had, that I was working with, I was creating out of that.
Did you guys start when you were playing live? Did you have a set list you were organized and going
Yeah,
through?
we had
or was
lots of set lists. Yeah,
Okay.
Still have some of them around now that were written out. I don't know if we always followed them exactly, or
Mhm.
a lot of times we only got to the first 3 or 4 tracks and got off because of whatever reason. Apparently we were famous for 10-minute shows very early on. But the set list in the first year, the first few months, year, I might say, like there'd be 4 separate tracks. In other words, Alan would have 4 different tracks that he was thinking he was doing. Each one had a different title, but they were all, and I have a different take on each one of them, you know, and I do something different for each one. But the output of that was total scream. Like if you had a song called Frankie Teardrop, which we didn't have quite then, or Frankie Teardrop would just be one Frankie Teardrop screamed all the way through, and I would just be more and more laying on sound on top of sound on top of sound, you know, with the same intensity. We were living very intense lives,
Mhm.
and we did all the way through, and in some ways still do, of course. But as artists, not even having a dime, but being totally in love with what we did, and having been involved, in love with it for many years before we started Suicide, and doing it and dedicated, you might say, that love led to intensity. So whatever we did was intense. It wasn't a light uh, kind of a passe kind of amusement for us in a sense.
Mhm.
It was an amusement, but it was a very important one.
It seems to me you have these monumental relationships, obviously Mari and Alan, and you haven't really collaborated with too many people outside of that very limited sphere.
Did you say Mari and Alan?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
True. No, I hadn't.
Are you more comfortable creating alone, or what is it with a partnership with someone like Alan that had you connect all those years pretty much solely with him? And
That's an interesting, good point. But before Alan, when I did play in groups, I had a group called the Reverend B that could be anywhere from 5 to 8, 9 musicians, no problem for me. I mean, in the sense of, because it was out of a context, it was out of an improvisational, you might say, avant-garde jazz concept, but that means other people. I never heard jazz for myself as being solo. It can be, but that wasn't my ultimate way I wanted to perform it. And then other groups I played in, other people's groups at that time, gigs. And then before that, little rhythm and blues gigs, sometimes I'd called in to play at a school or something, do a show. I was in a band in St. Albans, Queens. I was a jazz kind of a band. That's always involving other people. When it got to where the time point that Alan and I met, uh, now it was like an apex of there was nowhere to go really. I mean, the Reverend B thing and where I developed through the whole my jazz uh, erudition, you might say, which took many years. I wanted to explore totally, embrace. Through about my time, which was before my time a little bit, bebop, and through the avant-garde. And now I had, I was going through, I was playing, it wasn't, and now is the electronic avant-garde, you might say, with Cecil Taylor. Well, like Sun Ra did it too, but I didn't know at the time. Playing free on electric instruments. But the reality, straight on economic reality too, is that there wasn't any, we couldn't keep a group together. We didn't have any shows, any groups. We met, we didn't know we were going to have a group right away, but we were on I still had my group, Reverend B, for whatever times I could do that, perform with that. And the rest was hanging out, kind of like just barnstorming ideas and things and just hanging out in between at museum with Alan, say, when I wasn't hanging out, when I was with Mari, say. And of course, with Mari, it was the same thing. It was, of course, I wasn't going to be hanging out very much with other women. So you have one woman. And with Alan, usually at some point you have one band. Now, Suicide could have been 5, 6 people. Alan would have liked it to be many times. So, we got to get a drummer. We got to do this. So, going forward now, a year or so into it. But we could, not only was it the economic thing, we really couldn't keep a band together, rehearsal space. If you're not going to be having enough gigs every once in a while, at least, you're not going to keep them together. This is not, we wanted to make music all the time. When we were there, I wanted, I was a musician. Alan was now dedicated to making music. Like he was still dedicated to making art. That's something he's doing every day, all the time. This is what his life was about. My life was about. This is the obsession of art for some people.
So in the years before A Way of Life, there was about a 5-year break of the band, maybe a little bit longer. You stayed in contact with Alan? Did you talk about doing additional work, or did you need that space, that time?
Which space was that again?
Between the Z Records album and A Way of Life. I think there's about 5 or 6 years.
No, that was, there was no opportunity for us. We never had a major label until years later. Mm-hmm. Mute bought the first album from Marty Thau, and they wanted to put out the second one. And then they started bringing in reissues, and then we did a new one. No, we did the new one just with Rick. Rick said that we should just make a record now, 1988 or something. Mm-hmm. And then we'll sell it. And that's the way it was with that. It was YB Blue. That's the way it was with that. There weren't any labels coming in and asking us to be on their label. Every time we did something, like I say, luckily we say with Rick, but otherwise we didn't have the money to go into a studio. And if you didn't go to a studio, you didn't make a full record. It wasn't the digital world then, wasn't even a CD. So that's what it was, man. The waiting period was the reality of nothing happening that way.
Were you and Alan close during that time? Did you stay in very close contact, seeing each other?
We were pretty close. Yeah, we were definitely close for the first several years. I mean, once, of course, when we started, we met each other. We were both pretty much on the ropes, you might say, on the street. I was involved, of course, with Mari. Without Mari, and our life was, because Mari was an artist too, and we had kids, children now. No bread, artists living like this, and so there's a lot of, I'd spend a lot of time out and also looking to develop as a musician, which he understood outside. And Alan had just left his wife soon before I met him because when he decided he had to become a performer, he had to leave his entire past life behind. He said he walked out of his marriage, his job, all the stuff he was doing. He had a regular job in Brooklyn. So we were like, I've described it that way before, in a way like two ships who meet, in a sea, maybe at night in a sea, and there's nothing else around. We met in the same place, just, you know, because we both came to the same place in our lives. So sure, we were closer then because there was nobody else around or whether really understood us on that level. And we decided to put a group together. Sure, by the time of Way of Life, Alan had already had a life, a little more personal life, which he had through that time, but it became, very centralized. He met Liz Lemaire, and now he had a little more of a home life too. Eventually, so we met. It's like teenagers, man. They grow up, they can be in the same gang, and eventually, usually they get girlfriends and they get married, and they don't stay.
Yeah.
But we were always close, and so we had, because we did shows, we did albums, we talked.
I was very familiar with Suicide in my earlier years. I think
Right.
one thing that really highlighted your solo work, that really made me aware, is Clouds of Glory. A few years ago, Permanent Records did a reissue of it, and I picked that up, and I became quite fascinated with that album. And that Clouds of Glory was a record that you put out chronologically before A Way of Life for Suicide.
Yeah, it actually was recorded mostly in like 1981.
Okay.
Right after the second Suicide album. But by the time we got a deal for that, and Marty was, couldn't finally found a deal, thankfully. Thanks for him. Might have been 84. Right. It took 3 years. But yeah, it was before.
Were some of those songs envisioned to be Suicide songs? Were you writing
No.
those with no?
They weren't envisioned specifically for that reason. They were envisioned, they came out of the suicide, my suicide experience musically, but putting them in a different scenario. Instrumental, different kind of visual. It was a visual record for me too, in many ways. I saw that record as much as I heard it and followed what I saw. Spatially, sound is visual too. So to some more than others, some see colors a lot, composers always talk about the colors of different keys, all this. But sound also has shapes. It also has ambient visual qualities. It could be, in terms of space and size, landscape rather, size, vis-a-vis colors and things. Not just talking about narration, not even program music where you're telling a story. It wasn't that at all for me. But it was a visual sight that could be filled in on a canvas, but with certain sounds I was using. And that's where I wanted to go. That's what's driving me.
Are you still composing regularly?
Regularly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, regularly.
And
quite regularly.
I believe the last solo album, Demolition 9, is that
Yeah.
the one? Okay.
That's it.
So that's been a few years since then. What is your output? Like, what is your appetite for being able to share this music?
I would share something every day if it was ready to share. But it was something after Demolition 9. Bureau B put out a cassette compendium of things that it's called
The Sum of Our Wounds?
Yeah. But but as far as sharing, I have no problem with sharing. The challenge for me and the process that I'm involved with is creating something that is worth creating to me, is new for me, to me. So each album takes me on a whole entirely different adventure. Because it can start out one way, you have certain ideas. Oh, yeah, I can do it. Let me start out with this. That was a great idea from Demolition 9. Let me go from there. And then as soon as you're in the water, man, it's like, no, man, that's not going to happen. It's not going to do it now. It's not working for me. gotta go further, man. I want to hear some, it's gotta, and that can take years. Or sometimes you can do it overnight. I've done albums that, I mean, overnight, pretty fast.
Yeah.
And it depends, I guess, where you're coming from and what you're looking for, and what you brought into yourself during that time, what you're studying, what you're thinking about,
So,
what you're asking.
so
Yeah,
if you look at your back catalog, like for example, Les Nymphs,
right.
you were in a particular headspace there versus,
Yeah.
say, Strange World. How do you, how do you demarcate those?
I do them probably the same way you're doing them, Nate. I see them after the fact.
Uh,
I mean, I see them while I'm working on. Okay, I knew Les Nymphes was. I start to see the possibilities of this other world that seems fresh for me at that moment. So it's giving me ideas. Now, it's different to have ideas and to develop ideas is a process, of course. Because in exploring, you don't, you're like in a totally new territory, but you have the idea, you have certain materials that could work here or there. And then you come back to how you've assembled those materials and you see what works and what doesn't work. So the editing process, you might say, is quite extensive. And when you're talking about an album's worth of material, that's not necessarily song form, song after song after song of something you kind of know you've been in before, even though it is different. You're writing new songs, something. There's certain formats that are going to be easier to deal with the format that way because it's more familiar to you.
mm-hmm.
So if you're going into, there was a painter, Philip Guston, just to give an example. I think around that time, like abstract expressionism too, they considered art was a process for them of a psychological working out. Like Guston was talking about how it's like psychotherapy, you know. So in his time of, that was like the thing, going through analysis, you might say, He was going through analysis through his painting. And there's a parallel there, but you are going through analysis, but it's an aesthetic analysis. You know when something is better than something else. You know when you did something that can be changed for the better. And you know when you finish something, if it's not good enough to come out for you, and you got to keep going, and you start, you're always thinking, man, especially when you get into those places, what can I add? What can I do? What can I bring to this? Because it's like, again, you're like on a raft out in the middle of, nowhereville. It's survival. It's literal survival. I mean, that's what music is for me, I guess.
But it also shows your evolution as a person. The person you were for
Exactly.
Strange World is not the person you are today. Is
Exactly.
there another chapter you're working on right now? Do you think we'll see another Martin Rev solo album in the coming years?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, we're going over an hour, not to be
Sorry, Martin.
but it is something I have to get back to before a certain time. Otherwise, the day misses it totally.
Gets away. Okay.
But there is on a daily basis, you might say. And it should, it's getting to a place where it's always in a place where I'm challenged by it, but sometimes more positively than others. Sometimes the challenge, when you get familiar too, that's the thing with working on say an album's length worth of material. I notice, of course, everything is fresh in the beginning. You have a blank canvas, like Jack. You open up cans of paint and just throwing them on. Everything is one glory after another. It's beautiful. The potential is great. Then you come back to it, what you did the day before, and you say, yeah, but okay, but that's, that was great. It was fun, but this is not working for what you're creating, what you're going to eventually structure or compose without thinking of structure or thinking even composing. but it's not going to last, so to speak, to you. So you start honing it and honing it and honing it. Now you're talking about 40 minutes, honing and ecstasy, agony. Mm-hmm. And also you have the time that you've spent with this material. So even when it's fucking great already, a lot of it, you're not hearing it because you're so familiar, man. It's the old adage, they say, familiarity breeds contempt, bleeds contempt too, you know? And it does, man. Even your own work, man. It's like, because you take a couple of days off to get fresh, or do it, wake up in another environment or earlier or something like that. And now you're here, holy shit, man. That's great. I was listening to it the other day and it was like, oh, not again. That's really what something's saying. And oh, not again. I've heard it too much. So now I think, who wants to put that out when it's like, so to always have a balance of what the reality is of your working too. Mm-hmm. Balance, but it takes depends what your aspirations are. I have no aspirations anymore. I don't expect to sell anything. I don't expect to, I don't expect to become anything that I'm not now. I don't expect to make any more money than I am now, not from music, especially. If I do, I do. Great. If I don't, I don't. So it's not serving a purpose other than it's got to be right. I got to come up. It's got to be moving me. I got to say, wow, this is cool. I like it. I'll listen to it.
I'm sure you recognize the imprint you've had. Hopefully you do. Yeah, the influence of tens or hundreds of thousands of musicians and artists. Marvelous catalog of music and art. Is there anything else you'd like to do or accomplish, or any loose ends you want to tie up with the remainder of your time?
No, I try to create music, man. I want to try to create sound. Mm-hmm. And sound pieces, if they involve video, fine, with other artists probably, because I don't need to do everything. I don't need to be the videoist and the musician and the producer and the director and the lead actor. That's fine, but I don't need to do that in this scenario. Some scenarios you do maybe to get the work done.
Right.
So I want to just because there's never an end to this road. There's never an end to discovery. And it's an adventure that is endless, to repeat myself.
Well, it's beautiful.
So that's all I want to do is keep adventuring.
Well, I hope when that next chapter is complete and you're ready to share, we could talk again and we could do a deep dive on whatever new project you have in store for us. So, Martin, thank you so much. Do you have any live shows, anything else coming up you'd like to share with folks?
Not going out again in May, actually in the UK. Mm-hmm. You're not in the UK, are you?
I'm in Sydney. I'm in Australia.
Oh, you're in Australia. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going out and doing 2 shows in the UK in May. Festival in London, Wide Awake, and Leeds, Ice Club in Leeds. And then we're doing apparently a Primavera, which is called a pre-Primavera, because it was too late to put us into the Primavera when they found out we were going to be in Europe. And apparently they have a pre-Primavera concert that goes on, I guess, on the same grounds a little before, like right before it.
Right.
Festival. So that would be in May and June.
I'll find those links and I'll put them in this episode page. If anyone's in the UK and Europe and can get over to these gigs, I fully encourage them. And I hope at some point there's an announcement for Australia as well. But, we're pretty far from the rest of the world, so I won't hold my breath, but I certainly will light the candle for it. Martin, thank you so much again, mate. Much appreciated.
All the best. Be good, mate.
Okay, you too.
Thank you.
See
Ciao.
You.
Oh, what a good dude. Man, so honored to have him on the show. I mean, the guy is such a pioneer on things, and he's so damn cool. And his solo work is quite compelling, quite mesmerizing. I mean, start anywhere in his catalog and just kind of go through it. A lot of it's on streaming right now, but try to buy the vinyl if you can. Help support him, and grab some tickets if you are anywhere near a place where Martin is playing live. Again, see this legend if you can. And that's it for this episode of The Vinyl Guide. Thank you so much, everyone, for downloading and listening. And I really encourage everyone, if you have a moment or two, head up to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave a positive review for The Vinyl Guide. It's 5 out of 5 stars. You can say something nice. That is always appreciated. Of course, you can share these podcasts on social media. That's always encouraged and appreciated. And we'll be back shortly with a brand new episode. So until we talk next time, get out there and buy some records, people. Cheers.